The sound of a career ending is not a bang, but a wet, tearing pop. I heard it from the bench, a sound that cut through the squeak of sneakers and the roar of the crowd like a razor. Simone Grant, our captain, our titan, went down in a tangle of limbs under the basket, and the world just stopped. I watched, my own breath trapped in my lungs, as she crumpled. She didn't scream. That was the most terrifying part. Simone, who roared and commanded and filled every space with her presence, was utterly, frighteningly silent. Her face, usually a mask of focused intensity, was twisted in a kind of shocked betrayal, as if her own body had committed an unforgivable act of treason against her. The silence that followed the pop was heavier than any noise. It was a vacuum, pulling all the air from the arena. Then came the frantic whistles, the trainers running onto the court, the hushed, horrified whispers rippling through our bench. I felt useless, a rookie still learning the plays, watching a legend fall. Later, in the quiet, sterile-smelling locker room, Coach Miller pulled me aside. His face was grim, etched with the stress of losing his best player mid-season. "Eli," he said, his voice low. "Simone's going to need help. A lot of it. She lives alone. I need someone responsible, someone quiet, to be on point. Groceries, rides to PT, making sure she's not alone." He looked at me, and I knew why he'd picked me. I was quiet. I was responsible. I was nobody, which meant I had no attachments or dramas that would complicate things. I was a blank slate he could assign a task to. "She won't like it," he warned. "She's proud. But it has to be done. You're on Simone duty until further notice." Simone duty. It sounded like a punishment or a chore. I just nodded, the word yes, a dry little pebble in my throat. I was being tasked with orbiting the sun, now that it had been knocked from the sky. I had no idea that I was about to get burned. The first time I went to her apartment, the silence was even louder than it had been in the arena. I knocked, the sound echoing in the unervingly quiet hallway of her upscale building. The door opened a crack, and one dark, suspicious eye peered out. "What?" The voice was gravelly, rough with disuse and pain. "Coach sent me," I said, holding up a grocery bag like a white flag. With supplies, the door opened wider, and I got the full picture. Simone Grant, 6'2" of solid, undeniable power, was leaning heavily on a crutch, her entire left leg imprisoned in a massive black brace. She was wearing a faded university t-shirt and gray sweatpants, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the sterile medical equipment that now defined her. Her apartment was like her, minimalist, impeccable, and intimidatingly clean. It was all sharp angles and cool tones of gray and white, with not a single personal photograph in sight. It felt less like a home and more like a waiting room. She grunted and limped back towards the living room, leaving me to trail awkwardly behind her. "Just put it in the kitchen." "Don't expect me to thank you." I navigated the pristine space, feeling like a clumsy intruder. I unpacked the groceries, oat milk, kale, lean chicken, all the things on the nutritionist's list, and the silence stretched between us, thin and taut. I tried to fill it. "Do you need anything else? Maybe some coffee?" She was on the couch, leg propped up on a mountain of pillows, staring at the blank television screen. She didn't look at me when she answered. "The machine's broken." It was a lie. I could see the sleek, expensive espresso machine gleaming on her counter. It was a dismissal. A wall. I should have left then. My duty was done. But I looked at her, at the rigid set of her shoulders and the way her hand was clenched into a white-knuckled fist on her thigh, and I saw the cage she was in. It wasn't just the brace on her leg. It was the pride, the loneliness. So I stayed. "I can make it on the stove," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The old-fashioned way." "If that's okay." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then a barely perceptible nod. "Fine. Just don't burn it." I didn't burn it, but it was probably the worst coffee I'd ever made. It was bitter and weak, a pale imitation of the real thing. But as I handed her the mug, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. A tiny spark of warmth in the cold, quiet apartment. It was nothing. It was everything. The days fell into a strange, stilted rhythm. I'd go to practice, then I'd go to Simone's. I became a master of her silent language. A sharp intake of breath meant the pain was bad. A slight tightening of her jaw meant she was frustrated with the physical therapy exercises I was forced to help her with. We rarely spoke about the team, about the game, about the gaping hole she'd left on the court. It was a raw, open wound, and we both instinctively knew not to touch it. Instead, our world shrank to the confines of her apartment, to the careful, clinical intimacy of her recovery. My hands, which were meant to handle a basketball, learned the specific tension of her quad muscles as I helped her through stretches. I knew the exact angle to hold her leg to minimize the sharp, shooting pain in her knee. I'd brace her weight against my shoulder as she practiced balancing, her breath warm against my neck. Each touch was professional, prescribed by the physical therapist's notes, but it felt like I was handling something sacred and fragile. A fallen idol. My internal monologue was a relentless, humming engine of anxiety and a strange, budding fascination. Don't grip too hard. Is she breathing okay? God, her shoulder blades are so sharp. Focus, Eli. This is just a job. But it wasn't. I started noticing things. The worn spine of a poetry book on her nightstand. The way her eyes, usually so fierce and guarded, would soften when she looked out the window at the rain. The barely there scent of sandalwood and something else, something uniquely her, that clung to the pillows on her couch. One afternoon, while we were going through the monotonous motions of her exercises, she hissed in pain and slumped back against the couch, her face pale. "I can't," she whispered, the words ragged. "I can't do this." For the first time, the wall cracked. The frustration, the fear, it all bled through. I didn't know what to say. The protocol didn't cover this. So I just sat on the floor in front of her. "Okay," I said softly. "We can stop for today." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. It was stripped of the captain's authority, of the athlete's pride. It was just her. Vulnerable. "Why are you so quiet all the time?" she asked, the question coming out of nowhere. I was startled. I don't know. I just listen." She held my gaze for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Yeah," she said, her voice rough. "I've noticed." Then the wall was back up, the moment over. But something had shifted. The air in the room felt different, heavier with unspoken things. I was no longer just the helper. I was the person who had seen the crack in the armor. The complication arrived in the form of a ghost. I was in Simone's kitchen one evening, trying to make a soup that didn't taste like cardboard, when her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a name. Monica. Simone, who was on the couch meticulously rewrapping her knee, went completely still. The tension in the room snapped taut, like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. She didn't answer it. The phone buzzed again, insistent. "Are you going to get that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, stirring the soup with more force than necessary. "No," she said, her voice flat and cold. The word hung in the air between us, a solid, heavy thing. She pushed herself up, her movement stiff, and limped over to the counter, grabbing the phone and silencing it with a vicious jab of her thumb. She stood there for a moment, her back to me, her shoulders rigid. I could feel the storm brewing inside her. This was a different kind of pain, not the physical ache I had grown so accustomed to navigating. This was something older, deeper. She turned around, and her face was a mask again, but the cracks were showing. "She was my point guard," Simone said, as if that explained everything. "In college." And the after was loaded with a decade of unspoken history. I didn't push. I just nodded and went back to the soup. But the ghost of Monica stayed in the apartment with us for the rest of the night, a third presence that made the silence feel crowded. It was a reminder that Simone had a life, a past that I knew nothing about, a past that could still hurt her. It also made me realize the precariousness of my own position. I was just a temporary fixture, a tool for her recovery. Once she was healed, I would go back to being the quiet rookie on the bench, and she would go back to being the untouchable captain. This strange, fragile world we had built within the four walls of her apartment had an expiration date. The thought sent a sharp, unpleasant pang through my chest, a feeling I refused to name. It felt too much like jealousy, too much like longing for something I had no right to even want. The soup tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, helping her with her final set of stretches before I left, the air was still thick with it. My hands on her leg felt different, hesitant. I was more aware than ever of the line between us, the professional boundary I was terrified of crossing. And for the first time, I felt like she was aware of it too. A week later, the sky broke open. A furious, late autumn thunderstorm rolled in, trapping us in the apartment. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of her living room, and the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging us into a disorienting, gray-lit darkness. My first instinct was panic. The routine was broken. The carefully constructed order of our days was gone. Simone, however, seemed to relax. In the gloom, illuminated only by the frantic flashes of lightning outside, the sharp edges of her face softened. "Well," she said, her voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the dark. "Guess you're stuck here for a while." I could hear the faintest hint of something in her tone, something that wasn't bitterness or frustration. It almost sounded like amusement. She guided me by the sound of my fumbling to a cabinet where she kept candles. My fingers brushed against hers as I took the matches, and this time, neither of us pulled away. We lit a few candles, their small, dancing flames casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The pristine, sterile apartment was transformed into something else, something ancient and intimate. We sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, watching the storm rage outside. The power outage had stripped away all the usual distractions, the television, the phones, the pretense. There was only the sound of the rain and our breathing in the dark. "I hated the quiet at first," she said, her voice soft, confessional. "After the injury. It was too loud. All I could hear was that sound." The pop, I knew the one she meant. I nodded, even though she might not have been able to see me clearly. "No. I don't know. Sometimes it's okay." We sat in that shared quiet for a long time. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the storm outside and the new, fragile peace inside. Then she asked, "What are you afraid of, Eli?" The question caught me off guard. No one ever asked me that. I was the listener, the quiet one. Being seen, I guess, I admitted, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. Or maybe, not being seen at all. I'm not sure which is worse. A flash of lightning illuminated her face, and I saw a deep, profound understanding in her eyes. "I know what you mean," she whispered. The storm wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside, too, a tempest of feelings I had been trying to ignore. And in the flickering candlelight, with the world washed away by rain, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating pull of letting the walls come down. I was drowning, and I didn't even want to be saved. The next day, the power was still out. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt washed clean and new. The air in the apartment was different. Lighter. I decided, on a whim, to cook. Not the bland, prescribed recovery meals, but something real. I found flour, eggs, and sugar in her well-stocked, but rarely used pantry and decided to make pancakes, the way my mom used to on Sunday mornings. It felt like an offering, a way to bring a piece of myself, of my own home, into this sterile space. The smell of melting butter and browning batter slowly filled the quiet apartment, a warm, comforting scent that felt like a rebellion against the antiseptic smell of recovery. Simone watched me from the couch, her expression unreadable. I worked with a nervous energy, terrified I would mess it up, that she would see it as a foolish, sentimental gesture. When they were done, I stacked them on a plate, found some maple syrup in the back of a cabinet, and brought them to her. I sat on the floor in front of her with my own plate. We ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind shared between people who no longer need words to fill the space. The pancakes were a little lopsided, a little burnt on the edges, but she ate every single bite. "No one's ever cooked for me here," she said finally, her voice low. She was looking at the empty plate, not at me. "Monica, she hated cooking. We always ordered in, the ghost was back, but this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an explanation. A piece of the puzzle she was offering me." "Well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mom always said pancakes can fix almost anything. A small smile touched her lips. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile I had ever seen from her, and it completely transformed her face. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds after the storm. It lit her up from the inside, chasing away the shadows. In that moment, looking at her in the soft morning light, the professional line I had been so carefully towing didn't just blur, it evaporated. It was gone. All that was left was me and her, and this new, terrifying, wonderful thing taking root between us. I wanted to reach out, to trace the line of that smile with my finger. I wanted to know if it felt as warm as it looked. I clenched my hands into fists in my lap, my heart hammering against my ribs. The pancakes hadn't fixed everything, but they had changed something irrevocably. The breakthrough didn't happen with a crash, but with a quiet, shattering whisper. It was a few days later, a bad knee day, as we had started calling them. The swelling was back, the pain a dull, persistent throb that medication couldn't touch. She was short-tempered and frustrated, pushing herself too hard in the exercises until a sharp, tearing pain made her cry out. She collapsed onto the floor, her face buried in her hands, and her shoulders started to shake with silent, ragged sobs. All the strength, all the pride, all the carefully constructed walls just crumbled into dust at my feet. My own chest ached in sympathy. I knelt beside her, my hand hovering over her back, unsure of what to do, what the protocol was for a Titan's tears. There was no protocol. There was only this. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder. She flinched at first, then sagged into my touch, the sobs becoming audible now, raw and full of a pain that had nothing to do with her knee. "It's not just the knee," she choked out, her voice muffled by her hands. "They're moving on. The team. I watch the games. I see them figuring it out without me. What if I can't come back? What if I come back and I'm not me anymore? What if this is it, Eli? What if this is all that's left?" Her fear was a living thing in the room, vast and terrifying. She was afraid of being forgotten, of being left behind. The same fear I had confessed to her during the storm. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I didn't say, "You'll be fine," or "You're the strongest person I know." Instead, I just said the truth. "Then I'll still be here." She lifted her head, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, her eyes searching mine for any hint of a lie. She found none. I slid my hand from her shoulder down her arm, my fingers finding hers. I laced them together. Her hand was so much larger than mine, her callous fingers wrapping around my own. It wasn't a gesture of support from a caretaker anymore. It was an anchor. It was two people holding on in the dark. She squeezed my hand, a silent, desperate message of gratitude, of acceptance. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had fallen completely in love with her. It wasn't the captain, the legend. It was this person. The one who read poetry and hid her fear behind walls of silence and whose smile could light up a room. The one who was holding my hand like she was afraid I might disappear. The space between us after that was charged, humming with everything that had been confessed and everything that was still unspoken. The air was thin, and I felt like I couldn't draw a full breath. Later that evening, after the tears had dried and a fragile calm had settled over the apartment, I was helping her to the couch. It was a move we had done 100 times, a practiced choreography of support and balance. But this time was different. As I helped her lower herself onto the cushions, my hand lingered on her waist. She steadied herself by placing her hand on my shoulder. We were frozen like that for a long moment, close enough for me to count the flecks of gold in her dark brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The entire world narrowed to this single point, to the space of a few inches between our faces. She was the one who moved first. Her eyes searched mine, asking a question I was too terrified to answer and too desperate not to. Her gaze dropped to my lips and my breath hitched. Then, slowly, tentatively, she leaned in. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle press that was more of a question than a statement. I answered by leaning into her, my hand sliding from her waist up her back, pulling her closer. It wasn't a kiss of explosive passion. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep relief. It was the feeling of finally breathing after being underwater for a lifetime. It tasted of salt from her earlier tears and the faint, sweet taste of the tea we'd shared. It was a quiet surrender, an admission of a truth we had both been fighting. When we finally pulled apart, we just looked at each other, our foreheads resting together. Her hand was cupping my jaw, her thumb stroking my cheek. "Eli," she whispered, and my name on her lips sounded like a prayer. It was the first time she had said it with such softness, such raw, unveiled tenderness. There were a million complications. She was my captain. I was the rookie. There was the team, the coaches, the world outside this apartment. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that was real was the weight of her hand on my skin and the undeniable truth that we had found each other in the wreckage. We had built something new in the quiet spaces, in the shared pain and the lopsided pancakes and the storm-lit confessions. It wasn't a duty anymore. It was a beginning. The morning after felt like the first day of the rest of my life. I woke up on her couch, a blanket tucked around me, to the smell of coffee. Real coffee. I opened my eyes to see Simone in the kitchen, leaning on her crutch with one hand while expertly operating the sleek, expensive machine with the other. The machine that was supposedly broken. She turned and saw me awake, and that small, brilliant smile I was coming to cherish lit up her face. "Morning," she said, her voice a low, warm hum. "Thought you deserved a decent cup after all the swill you've been making." The awkwardness I had dreaded was completely absent. It was replaced by a comfortable, easy intimacy that felt as if it had always been there. She brought 2 mugs over, handing one to me before carefully lowering herself onto the couch beside me. Our knees brushed, and the simple contact sent a jolt of warmth through me. We drank our coffee, the silence punctuated by the sounds of the city waking up outside her window. "So," I said eventually, my voice a little shaky. "What now?" It was the big question, the one that held all the complications and fears. She looked at me, her expression serious but calm. "Now," she said, reaching out and taking my hand, her fingers lacing through mine again, a gesture that already felt like home. "We take it one day at a time. I heal. You keep being you. And we figure this out. Together. The word settled over me, a balm on every raw nerve, every secret fear. It wasn't a promise of an easy road, but it was a promise not to walk it alone. I knew there would be whispers, challenges. I knew that when she finally walked back onto that court, our world would have to expand beyond these 4 walls. But looking at her now, her hand holding mine, the strength I had always admired in her was back, but it was different. It wasn't just the fierce pride of an athlete, it was a quieter, more resilient strength, one forged in vulnerability and shared in the dark. I leaned my head on her shoulder, breathing in her scent, the sandalwood and Simone that was becoming my favorite smell in the world. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full. It felt like peace. It felt like her.